Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is an author, a dancer, and much, much more. Her name is Margaret Izard. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. There's a lot of things I could delve into with your life, and it's funny because when people reach out sometimes, like I think someone, yeah, reached out on your behalf and was like, "Hey, would you be interested in having this person on your show?" And I'm like, "Yeah, cool." And actually, for my listeners, you might not know this. Sometimes this happens. I get people reach out, and a lot of the time it'll be like, "You should definitely have this person on your show for X, Y, and Z." And to me, that I love listening to stories, people's life stories. That's why I do the show. Um, and it's always kind of fascinating. Like, but the interesting thing is that I don't always immediately do my research. So what will happen is I'll book it in, but like first glance, like yep, 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 and then I'll go away for a month doing my business, and then I'll sit down and then I'll do the research. And I'm like, oh wow! And I start like reading into it and like really just kind of getting into it. And your story, I remember sitting in a bar one day just doing the research for it, and I was like, wow, this person's been through a lot. Like this is a strong person.
Okay, so what I think is great is that you sat in a bar doing the research.
It was during the
That's
day.
that's
It
my
was
favorite part of this whole
fine.
thing.
No, I mean, sometimes I like to mix it up. A lot of the time I just work from my desk at home, but sometimes, yeah, maybe I'll go to my favorite bar. There's some good music on in the background, and I've got a nice desk there, and I can just be in a different environment doing it. And I don't know, sometimes that helps, especially if I'm struggling to kind of get questions down or something like that. I don't know, a change of scenery can help. Um, but yeah, let's get just jump into some good stuff. So you're the mother of triplets, which in of itself is pretty amazing. That's not often something you come across. Besides the obvious identical twins questions, what are some sort of common misconceptions about having triplets?
Um, I think the first thing is that just because there's three, it doesn't make it easy because you're doing everything at once. I don't, everyone, it's like, okay, well, if you have to feed them the bottle, of course, my kids are in their 20s. Let me preface this with my kids are in their 20s now. So I've been through the whole gamut. I've done the whole thing all the way from beginning to end almost. But people think, oh, well, you're already there changing a diaper. It's just so much more easier if you just do two more. And it's like, no, it's three times as hard. It's it's when I think back to when they're young, because that's the first thing you think of. It's, you hear triplets and everyone thinks of little babies,
Right.
and they're 26 now. And yeah, the years of babies, yeah, it's my husband and I do still discuss it. It's parts of it you remember and parts of it have just kind of blanked out just because the things were hard, things were difficult, but it was something that we did together. We worked as a team. Um, Misconceptions, it's easy. It's not. I don't know what having one child is like. I only have the triplets.
Yeah.
So I don't know what having one child, having just one, another, we've obviously sought help wherever we can get it. And, the medical community was a really huge help with them, especially when they were young and coping and dealing with it. And one psychiatrist said, having triplets is like having one special needs kid, like one kid in a wheelchair, and the labor of love that goes into it, but just the hardship that you have to face. It's like having one kid in a wheelchair. And I was like, well, that's a really wasn't exactly the way I wanted to look at it, but when you think about how much work goes into it, yes. I raised these kids. I worked when they were young. I quit working when they hit elementary school. We were fortunate enough that I didn't have to work during that time. I tutored them all the way through college, and I'm pretty proud of how they turned out. There's, people always ask. There's two boys and a girl. They're not identical. They are fraternal. Funny story is when they hit high school, they were freshmen in high school, and I know you're in the UK, so I'm in the States, so people in the States know what that means. But that's the higher for you, it's higher school.
Hmm.
They're ninth grade. I think they were 15 at the time,
Hmm.
and the science teacher. I'm at the school with the kids, it's the week before classes start. The science teacher approaches us, introduces herself, and you have to keep in mind this is life science. Okay, she's teaching life science. I want to stress that because she comes up and I've got them behind me, so they're with me. There's two boys and a girl standing there, and she comes up and she goes, "Are they identical?" I just kind of went, "No, two boys and a girl. There's an extra chromosome. It's life science. And it's you things like that. That's when you encounter things like that. Just the I don't know if it's just that people are just so, blinded by it that, or, that they're just so stunned by it or surprised. I don't know what the answer is, but sometimes they say some really stupid things that just kind of catch you off guard. And I did. I emailed the principal and was like, I'm really kind of concerned about my kid's education if the science teacher doesn't know the difference between X and Y chromosomes. I was just like, so it's those are the really funny stories that I get, just that's the funny part.
I get my sarcasm from my mum and dad, and I can imagine what my dad would have said in that position. I'd do the same. I'd just be like, I'd be too tempted to just be like, I don't know, have a look. It's just,
I think I did the whole. I forgot what movie it was from, but it was the whole. One has a penis and the other has a vagina. I think that was my
yeah,
response. Was it's like. Because I did stand there for a minute with my mouth open, and by that, of course, the kids, they're 15 at the time, and by that point in time, they were used to things, people saying things or things happening like that, or awkward things being said, when they were babies. And this is a funny, it's an interesting story. It's an interesting way in which people look at it. I live in southern Texas,
hmm,
and so I'm closer to the Mexican border, and so there is a lot of Hispanics in Hispanic community in my area. I live in Houston. And so, the nurses, of course, my kids were born premature. They're triplets. The girl was 3.5 pounds. Each boy was 4 pounds. You put that together, that's 12, but almost 12. That's a big baby, but, it's three. So obviously they were in a NIC unit, ICU unit. And so the neonatal nurses warned us. They're like, in this area, Hispanics have this concern, this thing called the evil eye, and it's if they look at you with jealousy,
hmm,
then they fear that they've put some kind of evil onto you. And so don't be shocked if people will come up and ask to touch your children because they feel that if they've accidentally given you the evil eye without intent, they'll want to come touch your children to remove the evil from what their intent was, that they were looking at you with jealousy.
hmm.
And at the time I was told it, I was like, oh, that's just the strangest thing I've ever heard. But when it happened, because it happened twice. I know you're looking at me like, the first time it happened, and I had gone home and told my husband that this might happen. And it took quite a bit to get them home. They don't let you take them home all at once. You have to take home each kid 1 week apart so they can make sure that you can handle three at once. And when you
That's
get out of
interesting.
India, you'd be surprised at what I've been through. But we finally get them home. We finally get them to a point where we feel comfortable taking them out in public. Because you get a newborn and you don't want to take them out right away. And so finally we get to a comfortable point where we can take all three of them out at once. And taking all three infants out to dinner at a restaurant is a huge undertaking. And
Right,
we had a whole series of, if they start crying, you do the car, I'll do the bill, you do the kids, we had this whole exit strategy where it was like, we had the exit strategy of leaving if things, if the kids were crying too much and we were creating too much of a scene. But anyway, we were at a Mexican restaurant and it wasn't very crowded. There weren't very many people there. And, of course, see, I live, living in South Texas, you throw a stick, you hit 10 Mexican restaurants. But, we're out to dinner. We got the kids with us. They're in the triplet stroller, which is, that they ride in tandem in a row. And, someone came up and, a young couple came up and asked to touch them and explained that they had looked at us with jealousy and they explained it. And, yes, a neonatal nurse told me and warned me and thank you very much. And I appreciate it. And, we went on about our day, but yeah, it happened twice in Mexican restaurants.
interesting.
So
Though I
it's
mean,
just, yeah, just weird stuff that happens like that.
that's just part of life, isn't it? I suppose it depends what you believe. Like I believe in that. It wasn't something that I believed in initially. I was like, what? And then you start seeing things happening and certain experiences happen, and you're like, huh, maybe it isn't so crazy. I don't know. I'll at least keep it in mind. You kind of humor it a little bit. And
Yeah.
then, but that's so sweet that people actually like took the effort to actually explain that and show their support as well, which is cool. One thing that you touched on that I found really interesting is this idea of the division of love, of course, across three children the exact same age. Because most parents, I imagine, especially parents that will be listening to this who have multiple children, the first thing that might come to mind is the fact that, well, there'll be like an age gap, won't there? Like maybe a year or two, maybe several years. Some parents will do that. They'll have one kid and then they'll have one,
Mhm.
say, 5 years later. And that at least gives you time, like when you're dividing that time, obviously a newborn, a younger child is going to need way more attention than an older child, but that doesn't mean that the older child doesn't need attention. It's just different, and you have to kind of balance that out, make it work. I think the thing that I find quite interesting is like, how did you find as they were getting older ways and techniques to kind of divide your time evenly so that all the kids were kind of getting that love and attention as best you could?
I don't think we really had a strategy or an approach to it. I think it was a rather organic thing that came about. It was whoever needed it. And I think that that was more. It was just more organic, just because, especially when they were younger, it took so much time and energy. And it was like, oh, we're this is what we're, and I've said this in other interviews. It's like, this is how we're doing it today. Okay, this is, and it's not exactly what you expect. But as far as dividing time between children and who got what attention and who didn't, a lot of things we did together, especially when they were younger. When they got older, and when you think of junior high and high school in the states, we get into all these extracurricular activities. That is a huge thing in junior high and high school, and it got harder to divide time. I had, especially in high school, I had one kid building theater sets, I had one kid acting and singing, and I had another kid in band. And those are individually, those are huge extracurricular activities with commitments from the parents as it is, but to have all three occurring at once, it was, it was like, my husband worked full time. He still works full time. At the time I wasn't working. I had dedicated everything to these kids. And, there would be times where I'd be like, okay, the band people, I can give you this slice of pie over here at the beginning of the school year. And then because of my performing experience, I obviously helped the drama department. And that's probably why those two kids got involved in drama, but in the theater, because it was a great and fun program to be in. But I also helped a lot when they were in the productions, sewing costumes. I did choreography. I helped coach kids, and all free of my time, open, and so it wasn't just about my kids, but it just, it pieced out where they needed it. Everything got divided, and did everyone get an equal slice of the pie? I have no idea, but everyone got a slice of pie that they needed. And I think that it was just a very organic approach. And there were some days that were hard. There were some days that weren't easy, even all the way through high school and college. Some days are easier than others. It just depends.
What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned through being a parent to triplets?
uh, Patience.
Yeah.
I have no patience. I still have no patience. I still have no patience. Um, lessons of life. I write about a lot of lessons of life. I write about a lot of development. Yeah, but yeah, patience. The ironies of life. I think having kids and raising kids in general teach you the ironies of life, and what your perception of what you thought it was going to be versus what it ends up being is really different. But there's always, and I guess it's kind of, you mentioned your dad and your dad's humor, and, at the time you said, I was sitting there going, man, I wonder what his dad would have said. But, because I do get my humor from my father. I get my tenacity. I get my cutting edge humor, the irony, there's always a joke in the back of the mind. There's always something, and it's always been that way. And the nice thing is that it's carried into my kids. The middle son is a mechanic, and every Halloween, he dresses up as the crash test dummy. Which I'm like, my job is now done. I've raised, that's perfect, and they do. All three of them have some kind of sense of humor that is just ironic, it's funny, and when you watch these little beings that you've created grow into these great adults, and sure, they make mistakes. They're 26. I look back when I was 26 thinking, holy cow, I was stupid, and so but seeing their sense of humor and how it's developed is very pleasing, because it's just as funny as I am. At least I think I am, but who knows.
The thing that's always interested me about twins as well is like the relationship as they get older between each other. Um, Sometimes they'll be like connected at the hip, and that'll be their lives. Maybe their work will intertwine in some way, or sometimes their lives can be completely different, and they can be completely different people. What's the relationship like between the triplets? Like, what are they like as adults, and how do they interact with each other?
Well, I think what you refer to when you refer to twins, you have to keep in mind that without getting too scientific into it, because I looked at this when I was pregnant, because I was like really worried, and I did a bunch of multiples meetings, parents of multiples meetings, where I went
Oh
to these
wow.
support groups and local support groups. The very first meeting I went to was a set of triplets that were grown triplets that were there, and it was two boys and a girl. And the girl said, and here I am. I maybe had found out I was having triplets for 2 or 3 weeks by that point in time. And I was still in that shell shock stage, my husband walked around with that expression for like 2 months. It was just like that holy shit expression. It was just like, ugh. And yeah, it took a couple months to get that expression off. But even at that point in time, the girl had said that she always felt out of the loop, and so we always made sure that the girl was in the loop. But I think when you talk about twins and twins having a unique relationship, you have to remember that a lot of those twins that have those extremely close, unique, very attached at the hip kind of relationships are those are identicals, and those are
Right.
split from the same cell. And so they're very close like that, because they are they're similar DNAs. But their personalities are so similar, and it's a scientific thing that's why they have such a unique and close bond. A lot of fraternal, which is what my kids are, meaning the separate egg, separate sperm. A lot of fraternal kids don't necessarily share that same bond, that same unique bond. That being said, my kids did have a very unique upbringing, in that they always had a friend. They always had someone that was their teammate. They always had someone that had their back. They always, they weren't ever alone. I mean, they were alone, but they didn't feel alone. And interesting, when you get into junior high and high school, you hit those teens, and those teens who are going through those teenage years, they have that identity crisis. They don't want to be alone. They always want to be with a group. They always want to be, my kids didn't have that issue. They didn't have these identity crisis type issues. They didn't have this feeling of not belonging, or because there was and I also think part of that is the way in which we raised them, which was this huge family unit. We were very big in the family unit, very big in what our family is, and that this is something that we are. We do a lot of things together. We still do a lot of things together. We still travel together. We still, it's still a big thing, that this family unit. And I think that does come through in my writing as well, is that family is a big theme and undertone, and the need for family, and those who don't have families, and how it's developed and how it comes together, and if you've lost one, and all those themes are explored. And I think that's because of how I value family. But my kids, I don't think they have. I think they're close. I don't think it's what you think, that they're not attached at the hip, because they all certainly have their moments where they can't stand each other.
I think it's interesting. Like I've heard the same as well. Even with twins as well. That like sometimes they're just totally different. Like one of my housemates is a twin, and him and his brother are like really different people. Like the way they go about things. There's some similarities, but ultimately they're very different. And so I just find that interesting. Um, but yeah, moving it on. Moving it on. You mentioned writing, which is a good
Huh?
segue. So you write paranormal historical romance novels, which right off the bat there, that's a lot to take in. Where did the inspiration come for this? Like, why this particular genre?
Um, well, first off, I'm very well read. I love romance. I've loved historical romance. I used to snag the historical romance books for my sister and my mother without them knowing, because they were kind of steamy, and I was in my early teens and probably shouldn't be reading them. They were the old, I call them the Fabio covers that had the actor Fabio on them, with the long blonde hair and the chest and and I just love those covers. They're so hysterical now, and they were half painted pictures that were painted and almost a little bit more animated than what they should be. And I've always loved the historical romance. The paranormal's always appealed to me. The scientific side of time travel, which is what I write. At least that's the first series. It's always appealed to me. And so once I finished tutoring my kids through college and we came out of the pandemic, I've always wanted to write. I started writing in my 30s, and just I was not ready to write. It was not good. I don't think I was mature enough for the criticism, which is interesting because my performing arts background is dance and studying the art of dance since I was 3. And I'm older than that now. um, there's a lot of criticism in dance, and there's a lot of criticism. You have to take in a lot of critiques every time you go to a class, which I went to a class anywhere from 5 to 7 times a week. When I was in my 20s, when I was really studying, there's a lot of criticism there. So, it's interesting that in my 30s, I just wasn't ready to have criticism in my writing. So I quit writing. I threw it all out. Couldn't stand it. And, we came out of the pandemic. I tutored these kids. I felt like, I'd really accomplished something in my life. And it was, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. And, if you want to call it a midlife crisis, I don't care. I wanted to do something. And, I'd had this goal for some time, and I said, I'm going to sit down and do it. And, I took a long time learning to write. I can tell great stories. I'm extremely creative. I can spin great stories in my mind. I've done a lot of choreography. I've done a lot of performing arts, singing, acting, whole lot of dancing. Owned a studio, produced productions, ballets, Nutcracker every year for some time. So I understand the storytelling, the craft of writing is what I had to learn. And so I took a long time learning that. But tying back to your question is, why paranormal and why history? It's intriguing to me. It's very intriguing to me. And when I sat down, I decided I was going to do this. And the reason I told you that whole long story was because I took 3 to 4 months before I started writing to sit down and learn to write, took workshops. I researched what I wanted my series to be. I knew I wanted it to be a series. Um, I I wanted it to have something more than just here's a historical romance. I wanted it to be something that I call meat on the bone story. There's more to it than, the damsel in distress, the guy saves her, and they're in a historical setting. And there's more to it than that. There's time travel, there's fae, there's fables. I incorporated the Scottish folklore through their fables into these stories and made it an integral part of what the plot line is, and how not only love develops, but how the story develops, because we're trying to find these magic face stones. And so within, it's a series. So each book is a love story, but the underlying story of the series is the search for these magic face stones that have been cast through space and time. So, once you start getting into all this paranormal stuff and the folklore and the time travel and the science of it and what is not science and what is purely belief, you combine all that together, and it makes for a very rich story that I've really enjoyed telling.
Have you ever experienced anything paranormal?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Trying to decide, because it's been more than one. Yeah, I know everyone's like, ooh, yeah. I don't know where to start. I'll tell my favorite one. I'll tell one of my favorite ones. It's a very touching story. After I had because we've talked so much about the kids, that's why I'll tell this one. After I had the kids, and I finally, I told you about how they wouldn't let me take each one home. That I had to take each one home separately. I couldn't take them all home together. So I finally get the girl home. That's the last one because she's the smallest one. So I finally get her home, and first time I've got all three of them in their bedroom. And of course, we had them in one room. We lived in a small patio home at the time. I thought, at the time we bought the home, I thought, well, maybe one, maybe two kids. I just want a boy and a girl, and you get triplets, and it's kind of like, ah. So, but so they're all in one room, and their cribs were kind of all made this circle, and so you could kind of circle around and take care of each kid. And so I finally got the girl home, and I'm going between each crib, putting in a bed, and I'm kind of turning between each one, and I had this overwhelming sense of my ancestors, my grandparents, and all the people before standing around me going, look, oh, look, just this sense of their support and that they were there and they were proud and happy of the fact that we had finally gotten home, and it was just a very overwhelming feeling, this support and this, it was very moving, but just that feeling of they're there and they're there to help you and they're proud of you. It was very clumped, but it was very emotional, but very powerful. It was a very powerful feeling. So yeah, I think that's one of the strongest ones I've had.
It's interesting that as well, isn't it? Because typically with paranormal activity and the idea of seeing ghosts and stuff like that, spirits, it tends to have like a negative connotation. This idea that we might be afraid, there's something to be afraid of, and I think in a lot of instances that is true. But I think the opposite is true as well. Like there might be like ghost spirits, energy, etc., with good intentions, and that certainly sounds like one of them. And it's interesting hearing that sometimes. Like how those that are no longer with us want to still show their support in some shape or form, which is
Oh,
interesting.
I certainly think they do. I don't think there's, I fortunately have never had any kind of negative experience. I've
It's
always
good.
had very positive experiences, whether it's just been something flitting by that is someone I don't even know or something I'm not even aware of, or, I mean, I'm aware, you get an awareness that's there, but it's not someone I know, and I have had experiences with people that I know, whether they've recently passed and maybe they're visiting or, that happened with my grandmother. I had to go, I was in college at the time. This was years ago and probably one of the earlier experiences. And I had to go. My mom said, "Oh, go by her house and pick up her mail." And her house was already half empty. We had moved her into a resting home, and she had just passed 2 days before, 2 or 3 days before. And my mom was like, my mom said, she didn't quite feel comfortable going to the house that soon, and she had been raised in that home, and so she said, "Oh, just I want you to go by and pick up the mail." And so I went by and picked up the mail, and I was kind of walking through the house, and I just had the wind whirled around the house, and this was in Oklahoma City, so it's windy there all the time. But the wind kind of circled around the house, and something kind of tapped on the window, and I just had this feeling that she was there, that she visited, like she was stopping by on her way through, kind of like she's visiting places that were part of her life. That was the feeling. So I thought that was interesting, because the house was half empty. I was in a room that was void of furniture, that I had never been in, that had never, I'd never been in it without furniture. And it was a room I stayed in every time I went there. It was a room I was familiar with. It was a long room. It ran from the front of the house to the back of the house. And there was nothing in it at the time. And so that alone was weird. But I just had this feeling that she kind of stopped by.
It's interesting that as well, isn't it? Like when someone has passed on or like you're moving away from a place and the stuff's been taken and it feels quite empty and like you sit there and you go through the memories and there is like an energy about it, but sometimes that energy's gone and it's just a place now. And it's kind of like bittersweet because it's like, well, it's time to
Mm-hmm.
move on, it's time to start the next chapter and you remember the previous chapter, you remember the good times, but still that weird eeriness about it. Like
Mm-hmm.
like for instance, I'll be moving out of where I live soon, and I know that day's going to come when it's just like emptying it and like making sure it's just all done and everything. And I know what it'll look like because I remember like when I left the last place. I remember what it's going to be like here from when I moved in. Sorry. And it's just interesting that energy because I think it's always about like people make the place, with or without stuff in it, people make the place. But I think when it has stuff in it, it still feels like they're there. Like it's an echo of it. Like, there's
Hmm.
that famous picture of like Einstein's desk after he passed away, and it's like a complete mess. But it's like, you know, it feels like a still moment in time, untouched. Like
Hmm.
they're still there. And then when you start,
Yeah, yeah. Like, have you ever driven? Like, we've driven past that house, my grandmother's house. My brother, my sister, and I went back for a cousin's wedding. We went back to Oklahoma City for a cousin's wedding, and we drove past the house, and it just had this different energy about it.
no,
And you can tell, buildings have an energy, and I even talk about that in my books. Buildings have an energy about them, and whether you want to call it positive, whether you want to call it negative, whatever you take from it, but you certainly bring part of that energy, or the people that live there bring part of that energy. But there's echoes of the people who've lived there before. And and that was kind of with my grandmother. It was kind of like, she visited it and then she was gone. I mean, there was a definite arrival. She was there and then she left while I was standing there. And and it's interesting. I've talked about this in other interviews. When you go house hunting, and I
yeah.
don't, apartment hunting, house hunting. There was a house that in my neighborhood, and I know who lives there now. And at the time, when I was looking for houses 13 years ago, I've lived in this house 13 years, but when I was looking at these houses, this is a larger home. It was built on two lots. It's a very unique home. Um, and so the realtor was like, and the realtor was someone I knew through Parent Teachers Association. Our kids went to school together, and she goes, "Let's just go look at it. We'll just pop by, because it was empty." And so she's like, "Let's just go look at it." And I walked in this home, and it had such a negative energy for me. There were rooms
Mm.
I could not walk into. There was one room I went into, and I was like, "This room is it." It had, and the people who live in it now are lovely. They have a positive energy about it. The house itself has a different energy now, but I remember walking into that empty home going, just no, just absolutely, I just no.
I know exactly what you mean. I've had this two instances come to mind. There was I was lucky enough to meet my great grandparents when I was young because I was born early. So I remember my great grandma's house. It would have been, was it my great? Yeah, on my dad's side. I remember her bedroom. Like you had to get to the bathroom. You had to walk past the bedroom, and I was always a curious, nosy kid. Still am. And I remember just walking into the room and instantly feeling negative energy, like, oh, I don't like that. Like I was always sensitive to that, even at a young age, and I just did not like it at all. Um, had the same. I've told this story before, so the viewers know. But when I was living in Europe, um, I visited a former Soviet prison. It was like a sea fortress that had been converted into a prison, and it'd been like derelict for like well over 20, 25 years. And all the places in the prison where you'd expect to feel energy, you felt nothing. Like the prison cells, nothing. The really creepy medical area, nothing. Like it was weird, but just no energy. Even the executioner's block, the one place you'd think, oh, for sure, going to feel bad energy, nothing. The place where I felt the weird energy, the creepy energy, was you went downstairs, and bear in mind it's a hot summer's day, but obviously in a space where it's like there's shade, it can feel cool. It can feel, like cooler, which is understandable. But again, it's by the sea. There's no windows, so it's air coming through. So it shouldn't be that cold. There shouldn't be like a draft and a coldness of that
Mhm.
extremity, Shouldn't be that extreme, but it was. And I remember I was with my then girlfriend, and we were going down the stairs, and she was instantly like, "I'm not staying here," and she ran up the stairs, and I stayed with it for just a few 5, 10 seconds. I felt the same, but I was like, "Why? Why does it feel this way?" And all I could describe it as is like a feeling of dread, like just would like wave
Uh-huh.
over me, yeah. And more recent example, so I'm like yourself, I was apartment hunting, and we saw two places in the same day. The first place we saw, lovely, normal place, no energy at all, just nice. Second place we saw was like a horrible reminder of like places I've either visited when I was younger that I wanted to get away from, or just like bad memories of bad places. It was a horrible apartment that weirdly was more expensive than the other place. Don't know how that works. But yeah, it was dreadful. And like places can be fixed. Even if something looks dodgy, you can repair it, right? But I don't. It's hard to change energy. It's hard to like dispel that. If a place has that energy over it, it's unless you like knock it down and start again. I don't see how else you can really. Do you know what I mean? Like unless it's like
Yeah.
built on like maybe like a Indian burial ground or something, then you're just never getting away from that. But typically, I think like if something bad happened there or there's negative energy, best way is to start over. But this place just had that. Every room just felt unpleasant and just everything. The agent was unpleasant. The stairwell was unpleasant. The front, like I just looked at it and I was like, "There's no way I'm being here. This is just unpleasant." You just can't shake that energy. It's just
Mhm.
there. Um, Interesting stuff. Um, Moving it on, you mentioned about being a dancer, a dance tutor. You ran a not-for-profit dance studio for quite some time, and as you mentioned, you danced professionally. You did ballet, tap, jazz, hip hop. You did it all. What has dancing taught you about life?
Patience,
Yeah,
which
well,
I don't
fair enough. Yeah.
have. No, it's at first it was just something I really enjoyed as an escape. Um, I started at 3. I started very young.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I started very young. I was a kid who put the records on and danced in the living room. I stood on my head until I passed out. I did gymnastics when I was very young. Yeah. But I was always moving. And I think it was something that my parents just put me in. I have an older sister. She did it. And so we'll put Margaret in it. And then my sister ended up being a bookworm, and I ended up being this outgoing, dramatic, performer. And but what has it taught me about life? Resilience, patience. It's there's when you do a craft, you have to study it. It takes whether it's painting, whether it's acting, writing, even you probably passes into business life. You have to study it, and it's a constant study. It's not, you don't just wake, it's not like, oh, I made it to the highest level of the dance class in my studio or my where I'm studying. I've made it. I don't have to study anymore. It's a constant, uh, anything that you want to accomplish in life, it is a constant study of the craft. There's always something to improve. There's always some way to go improve it and improve upon what you're working on. And I think that that's just something that is the nature of humans. We are constantly searching, constantly looking, whether it's for gratification, whether it's for approval, acceptance, support, love. It's dance is a craft, writing is a craft, storytelling is a craft. You must constantly practice this. I When I was in high school, I attended a performing arts high school that's the same curriculum that they did the movie Fame and the TV show Fame off of, which came out when I was in high school, by the way. But they did that out of the New York schools, and there's an arts magnet school here in Houston, and that's what I attended for the performing arts. And even then, I'm supposed to be at the top of my game. I had to audition to get in. I traveled 25 miles one way to get to school in prime time Houston traffic, which Houston traffic is probably the worst traffic in the world. It takes 2 hours to get from Houston to Houston. Yeah, it's not only is it large geographically, but there's a lot of traffic, and it's better now. But it took quite a bit, and each day was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. in classes because you had to do your art area on top of all your studies. So even then, I'm supposed to be at the top of my game, and I'm still searching and looking, how do I make that better? Went on to college, studied dance in college, started out in the advanced classes. So I started as a freshman in college. I was in class with seniors and grad students, and skipped some classes because I'd already done that. So I tested out of them, sort of, so to say. But you're still searching, you're still looking. It's a craft, and so I think it's taught me that it's taught me a good work ethic. And that's really helped with writing because, you know, I've right. Let's see, we're in August. We're at the end of August, so I've premiered two books my first year. I've got two more books coming out. So my debut year, I'm going to have four books come out, and it's a series, and so one of the books is a Christmas companion book, but I've already completed the series is seven books, so it's that driving force of goal setting, completing, but achieving, and constantly looking to improve my craft.
Really, really, really great advice there and insight. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Obviously, you taught a lot of people with what you were doing in dance. What would you say are some of the most rewarding teaching experiences?
Teaching, yes, teaching is a very rewarding experience. It's been great. I think my favorite memory of teaching, I taught when I had a studio. I had a dance and gymnastics studio, and a retail store because, why not? I'm sort of an overachiever. I had a lot of retail experience, and so it just seemed fitting. It's like, well, why don't I make money? You're going to have to buy leotards and tights and take my class, so why don't I make some money doing it? You know, but it was quite a bit. And when my kids hit elementary school, I had to shut it all down because it just got with the triplets, it just got too much.
Yeah.
But as far as teaching, I think um, having there's been a number of times that I've had kids that have thought, whether they're children or whether they're teenagers, have thought this is something I can't do. This is something I've never thought myself to be able to do dance or to do ballet, or I've always wanted to do ballet. And one of the times that stands out is it's after I've closed the studio. I hadn't been teaching in some time, and so I was working with the high school that my kids were at, and they had asked me to do some choreography for a musical, and I was doing it for free, and so it helped with their budget. And so I would show up in afternoons and I'd help teach these kids. And so this one, she was a senior in high school and she had never danced. She never thought she could dance, and she got to do some ballet moves for all of 30 seconds. So it wasn't a very big thing, but to her it was huge. This was a huge thing for her, and she's like, and she just I gave her some ballet moves, some very simple ballet moves, and she got to do these ballet moves. And it was this opening thing of, I'm trying to remember which, I think it was Once Upon a Mattress. And it was an opening thing to the musical Once Upon a Mattress, which is a Carol Burnett show. But uh, this girl was so elated that she got to learn ballet, and she learned three basic steps that I teach 3 year olds. And it was just something that was just so huge to her. And after we got through with the production, she was just tearful. Thank you so much. I never thought I'd get to do ballet before, and I've lived a dream. This is a dream come true for me. Her mom came up to me afterwards and was tearful and just, thank you so much. I never thought I'd see my daughter do ballet. And she was really a graceful girl. It wasn't like she wasn't graceful. She was extraordinarily graceful, and it was very easy to teach her, but it was very rewarding because you made someone's dream come true. And that was a big part of that. I think was rewarding with the dance studio was that I had upwards of 300, 350 kids at one point in time. And you're doing, I not only did a recital every year, but I did a nutcracker every fall, and I did a spring ballet with the nonprofit company, did the two performances. And I had like county grants that helped me do that. But the studio itself did the production, and then the gymnastics program did an end of the year sort of um, exposition where they showed parents everything that they had learned. And watching these kids getting to achieve that, and that you help them do this, because this is for kids that's a dream. It's a big dream for them, and to help that come true, that's rewarding. And I think that was the biggest plus of it.
Thanks for sharing. So this is a big one. You had back surgery as a result of damage to your
Mhm.
spine that occurred when you gave birth to your triplets that we spoke about earlier. You went from 210 pounds to 170 pounds and would go on to experience a collapse in your herniated disc. You received further surgery for this, and as a result, you cannot twist. Is that right?
Well, no, I can twist. It's just sometimes I twist and shout, but
Hey,
um, it's lumbar 4 and 5, so it's very low in the back. It's the vertebra is just above your coccyx, And it's assumed that it's a prolonged injury from carrying the triplets, and I was, I was almost 200 pounds that morning that I went in to, to go have my C-section, and I was 130 pounds that next day. Once you got rid
Wow.
of all the fluids. The following, it took about a day, because I had all these, before having the triplets, I'd spent weeks in the hospital.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of IVs. The last thing that I had to stop contractions was magnesium sulfate in an IV, which is pure sodium. You know, and when you're pumping pure sodium in your body for 11 days, you have a tendency to bloat a little bit. And so, it took a bit to get, once all those fluids and everything, and I kind of stabilized as a human, because I was anemic the day that they were born, because they had robbed me of so much nutrients in order for them to survive, that, and that's why I was in the hospital. But it's my body went through an extreme change during that process, and it's never been the same since. But that's okay. I went back into dancing, and I didn't quite have, after having the triplets, I did go back into dancing, and I didn't quite have all my muscle tone back quite yet. And so, one herniation led to, it was a slight injury, led to not enough muscle support, led to, and I kept teaching and kept dancing and kept teaching and kept dancing, because that's what I've done all my life. And so, and right after the triplets were born, I did go back to work. So I worked full time. And it's overachiever type person that keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, and you just ignore the pain. And eventually, that was one of the reasons I closed the studio. Was it just got so difficult. And there was a point in time before I closed the studio that my doctor said, there's going to be a time where you're going to have to make a choice. You can have a simple surgery, you can have the medium surgery, you can have the major surgery. So when I decided to close the studio, the disc collapsed, and he said, "You have no choice now. You have to have the major surgery." So I had what's called a full fusion, where they take out the vertebra, and they fuse the two. No, I'm sorry, they take out the disc and they fuse the two vertebrae together. So the disc is no longer there, and that's why that part doesn't bend and twist anymore. But it's so far in my lower back that, only when I'm doing gymnastics kinds of things, or only when I'm doing extreme dance kinds of things, does it stop me from doing anything. I can't. And it really affected the left side, because that's the side that herniated. So it pinched on my sciatic nerve. So it affects the whole left leg. So I probably, technically speaking, I probably have like 85, 90% use of my left leg. But you can only tell it when I'm trying to do any kind of dancing steps or anything. That leg goes a little slower, or, it's just slower to respond. But it's not walking and everything. It's typical. It's just, I can still do a back bend. I just can't, back bend all the way through and put my hands on my ankles anymore. Or the left side, I can't pull my left leg over my head anymore, but I can pull my right leg over. It's, because I still dance, I still do my little exercises. It's just not as much as, before I had the surgery, or even when I was in my 20s, because I had the surgery in my 30s. So, old age catches up. But yeah, so I have screws and pins, titanium screws and pins back there.
What advice could you give to people based on the time you spent during that recovery process?
Um, uh, I approached it as, I really mentally prepared myself for it. I knew that I was going to be down for 4 months. I knew that it was going to be painful. I knew that it was going to be difficult. And my kids were still in elementary school at the time.
Wow.
I hated having a walker. I hated having a back brace. I hated not being able to do things, because obviously I'm a doer. I get up, I do, I go, and I'm one of those people that goes, 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 you know, and I had to mentally prepare myself for that. I had to really sit down and just, it's like, I am not going to be able to drive. I'm not going to be able to walk far. I'm not going to be able, and I just, it became the way that I focused that energy. It focused on healing. It focused on getting better. It's like, right now I have to rest, because if I don't rest now, I won't be better later. And right now I have to do my exercises, even though it may hurt and even though it's uncomfortable. If I don't do these exercises, I'm not going to get better. And the whole focus was I have this much time so I can get better, so I can get back to life. I can get back to my life and back to my things because it was a disruption in life. And, it was difficult. And, the kids were young and it was an adjustment for them. And I do recall, being I am an overachiever. I went back to a doctor's appointment after having the surgery and I didn't have my walker. And he was so mad because I could walk without the walker. So I showed up without the walker, so proud of myself. And he's like, "What are you doing?" Because, he's like, "I didn't tell you you couldn't walk," and I'm like, I hated the walker. I hated, I was in my 30s and I had a walker. What is up with that? But yeah, each day had, I had my goal of exercises, I had my goal of rest, I had, and it was all focused on getting to the end, getting to the freedom of being able to have my life back. So I think that that's, you just have to compartmentalize it. You have to focus on what you need to do in order to get to the end so that, you can get back to what you love.
Someone I know, shout out to Dave. You'll never hear this though. And he had a really bad leg injury recently, and the prognosis was there was all sorts. There was like, oh, he may never walk again, to, oh, this is going to take like 6 months or whatever. Dude's already like up and about. Like he was up and about probably within a month. And I remember talking to him about it, and he was just like, "I'm not going to let that stop me." Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and he said that basically, like to paraphrase, but like the stubbornness of wanting to get out there and wanting to do that, I think it exercised that leg enough that it pushed it, and the recovery was it kind of expedited. It got better
Mm-hmm.
quicker. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that mindset, that willingness to push through it, and yeah,
Oh
maybe
yeah,
that's something to be taken away from it.
I just recently, I was running through Chicago O'Hare Airport last February, and I sort of tweaked my foot a little, and being a dancer, I've had numerous injuries. The back injury isn't the only injury; it's just the major injury that I've had. So I've had a number of twitches and sprains and strains and this and that. I did point work, so that's taxing on the legs and the feet. But I was running through O'Hare Airport in February, going, and I was heading to meet my executive publisher, my the lady that approved initially accepting my books, and I was running to a party to meet her for this convention, and so kind of sort of tweaked my foot a little bit, and I got back, and it hurt and it hurt and it hurt and it hurt, and I went to the therapy, and it still hurt. And just last month, I finally, my husband had planned this vacation for us to go to Yellowstone, and we were going to tour the Teton Mountains, and the whole thing was walking. The whole vacation was walking, and I'm over here, my heel and my foot, my ankle are just killing me, and I'm like, man, I can't. There is, I've been limping around the house from chair to chair. There's no way I'm going to do this vacation. So I finally sat down with my orthopedic, and I'm like, dude, man, we got to talk about this. So they put me in a walking boot. And they said, I did the MRI, and they put me in a walking boot. I had a tear in my Achilles tendon. And if you don't know what that is, it is excruciatingly painful. It is, there's no way to replace an Achilles tendon. I mean, you're down for 6 months. You can't walk. You can't walk without your Achilles tendon. It's like you can't walk without your big toe. You can't walk without and so I had this tear in it. And it was it was a little thing, and it was like the pain like shot through the ankle. It was just excruciating. So they give me this walking boot. So I get the walking boot the day before we leave for Yellowstone, and I'm not kidding. I spent a week between Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons Mountains in a walking boot, and I hiked everywhere. I went up and down stairs. I remember coming out of one of the places in Yellowstone, and it's really difficult to walk to because it's all incline and it's stairs, but it's Artist Lookout, which is this gorgeous waterfall that's just hundreds and hundreds of feet, and there's this lookout that you have to climb all these stairs to. And I remember coming out of that area, and by that point in time, I'm on my husband's arm, and I'm like, because I'm lugging this boot around as well. is limping, and I got two kids in tow behind me. Of course they're in their 20s, but I got two kids behind me towing. So I'm on my husband's arm and I'm coming out of this area. And as I'm coming out of this area, this woman walks up to me and goes, "Yeah, you did it!" I'm just dying laughing by this point because that's how the whole trip felt. And I was only halfway through the trip by this point. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. I just came out of the boot recently. But it's funny we talk about that because it's like, it's I went through that same process. It's like I'm gonna wear this boot. I'm gonna do this vacation. I'm not gonna let anything stop me. I had someone at the hotel crack a joke going, "I guess there's no hiking for you." And I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 there's hiking for me. I'm hiking. I'm doing this." And I think that it's that tenacity that gets you. You ask for advice for someone, and what can you say to someone that has to go through this? And it's that tenacity. It's that will to get to your life, and you live through it. You still want to live. You don't let something like that hold you back. And yeah, I dance now. I don't dance like I did when I was in my 20s. Certainly don't. It's very different. But I still have my little exercises. I still do my little things. I still stretch. I still, but I'm not leaping across the floor like I used to. But that's okay. I still get to dance.
It's inspiring stuff, man. Thank you so much. Couple of final questions for you to tie everything up for today. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Ooh, uh, gosh, that's hard. I've gotten a lot of good advice. I think it's the whole theme of our conversation, which is don't give up. Don't life gives you lemons. Not only do you make you not only make lemonade, you make electric lemonade. You put some vodka in that. Live your life, and it's just that's what it is. You do you and live your life, and in it may be an adjustment. It may not be what you thought it was, but it is what it is. And you have to make the most of that moment. And if you can't, my husband and I always have the same approach to life is, if you can't laugh at life, you can't laugh at the obstacles. You can't, if you can't, you got to be able to laugh at those things. You got to be able to love life for what it is. You have to be able to get through it, strive, but live your life because it's the only one you got.
Thanks for that. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Patience.
Hey,
I have no
there
patience.
it is, number three.
I have no patience. No, yeah, just live your life. I think we've touched upon the fact of having a good humor, having a good sense of humor, and I think that that's been some of the greatest advice is find the joys in life, but you got to find the funny in the hardships because that's what makes the hardships worth living. Is finding the funny in it or finding the lesson in it. But my husband and I, we just laugh at it. If it's hard, we laugh. It's there's always an irony in it. There's never it's I wanted kids and God gave me triplets and it was like whoa, that's to me that if that is an irony of life, because I did have a hard time getting pregnant. I did have a hard time conceiving. I didn't do in vitro. I did have a surgery. I had endometriosis removed and boom, I had triplets out of that. And so it's like, it's be careful what you ask for, but I think God has a sense of humor. I think life has a sense of humor. And, you got to find the ironies in it, enjoy it.
Final question for you. Do you have any upcoming projects or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Ooh, upcoming projects. I have so many, it's like when I sat down and started to write and I wanted to do this, I was like, I want this series. And it was 3 book series. And it was, I got through the first book and it's like, no, 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 it has to be 7 books. And then, I hit a scene in the first book, and I've talked about this in other interviews. I hit a scene in the first book, and I had to come up with a backstory. Why do the stones have to go to the humans? They're in the Fae. They're in the Fae realm. Why do the stones have to go to the humans? So I came up with this whole wild story of these shape-shifting dragons and their evil father, and they betrayed their evil father because they were supposed to find the stones and give them to their evil father, and they gave them to the good Fae instead, the good fairies instead. And I just wrote the backstory, just boom, out of the blue. Just came boop out of the blue. And I walked away from my desk that day and I'm standing in the middle of the garage and I literally stop and go, I have a whole nother series. I have a whole nother series on my hands. So, I have, yeah, I know. So, and both series occur simultaneously. So the first series that's coming out now is Stones of Iona. The first book, Stone of Love, came out in March. The second book, Stone of Fear, came out in June. The third book, Stone of Lust, comes out October 21st. My Christmas companion book, which features a couple in the past, Thistle and the Mistletoe, comes out November 4th. Stone of Hope, which is the fourth book in the series, is currently in production. It's done editing. We have the cover, we have everything ready. I'm just waiting on a date from my publisher. That'll be probably sometime February, March of next year. And Stone of Doubt, which is the fifth book in the series, is currently with my editor for contract consideration. So those are all coming up. And like I said, the seven-book series is complete. I did complete it recently within the last month or so. Finished the seventh book. So there's love. I got to get them right. These are the stones: love, fear, lust, doubt, faith, and destiny. So there's the three good stones that are love, hope, faith. There's the three evil stones that hunt the good stones, which is fear, doubt, and lust. The six stones combined reveal the stone of destiny, which control with the stone of destiny controls the realms, which includes the human realms, the fae. Now, in addition to that, which I started writing years ago. When I first started writing and I first started pitching Stone of Love, a editor that I was working with at the time said, "Well, you may need a second project to pitch." And so I went back to those shape shifting dragons because I was like, "Oh, I've got a series with that. Maybe that's something I should write." And I wrote the first book because I wanted a second project to pitch in case I couldn't sell Stone of Love. So I wrote Damien's book, which is a shape-shifting dragon. He's a fae and he's immortal. He's a shape-shifting dragon. And there's three brothers with an evil fae father, and their evil fae father is in the first series. But occurring simultaneously at the same time Stones of Iona occurs, their books occur. And I wrote the first three books. So once I'm done with Stones of Iona, then I've got my little shape-shifting dragons. And that'll also be seven books because it'll focus on the seven stones. And then there's the Christmas companion book. So I've got the first Christmas companion book coming out. The second one's already been written that I hope to come out next Christmas. And then the third one I'll actually be drafting this Christmas because I like to write Christmas books at Christmas because that's fun.
Exciting stuff, man. Who knows? This could be the next big, like, multi-universe series.
It
You never know. It
is.
could be the beginning of something very special here. It sounds really interesting,
It's
genuinely.
thank you. It's yeah. I worked a lot crafting it before I
Mm,
started. This whole it's I view it as one. All these books together are one large story.
yeah.
And they're different parts of a story. And it's you create a backstory, and as long as it has goal mode of conflict, then you've got a story. And so that becomes a book and this becomes a book. And why wouldn't you want to know about that person? If I'm going to bother telling you about that person, then let's find out about that person. And so it sort of starts breeding, self-breeding in itself, but you want to tell these tales because it becomes richer with each telling. And it's when I first started this, I thought I'll write three books, and it just exploded. And it just comes out of me. I don't know, it's like I want to tell this because wow, you stop and you look at this part of it and you're like, wow, that's a story too. I want to tell that. And it does get exciting. So I have a lot to say.
I'm glad to hear it. I'm very excited for you. And oh, I wish you the very best with it. I hope it works out. I think this show will drop probably just a month before your that first or that book in October drops. So that's actually kind of good timing.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, it's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show, for sharing your story, for talking to us about your life, and some really, really great advice. Some of it I really needed to hear today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, massive pleasure. Best of luck with everything.
Okay. Thank you.
And to all the listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, I'll make sure to include links to Margaret's work in the description, as always. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did and you were watching it on YouTube, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, all of that fun stuff. If you are listening to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, please leave reviews. Please give us a rating. It'll help us out. It'll help us keep pushing this podcast further and further. We're fast approaching 300 episodes, and it's exciting, man. It's nearly 300. It's nearly 5 years. A lot of milestones. And with your support, who knows where we could take the show. So thank you so much for listening and for watching. And I'll see you all in the next one.